All right, we are here today. Welcome to the Friday Health Talk Week here at the Far South Chicago Coalition. We are here today to talk about a topic that's not very fun, but definitely we're going to get a lot of information. So we're talking about childhood cancer today, and I think it is such an important, critical issue. We have a wonderful doctor from the University of Chicago coming back. We have Dr. Roberson who's going to give us an introduction, but I want to go ahead and watch a video just to give us some perspective on this issue around cancer in children. And people don't think about this very often. We're going to talk about cancer with children, but we're also going to talk about cancer in general and how can we prevent it and how can we help those who are struggling through it. And so we're going to actually watch two short videos here just to give us a little perspective and a little information. Because as you know, here at the Friday Health Talk, we are definitely trying to inform, educate, and inspire. I do want to take one moment before we begin our program today to just acknowledge that as the Far South Chicago Coalition, we have had a major loss in our community this week here. Dr. Yvonne Wilson, who has been a pillar in this organization and in a number of organizations in the Far South area, has transitioned this week. And we are going to miss her deeply. We send our prayers to her family and to her church community. We have spent, all of us who work with the Far South Chicago Coalition and many of the organizations that are on the Far South side, are devastated and heartbroken. And we just want to send our love and support to her family during this time. She will live on in our work. She has community running through her blood. As she lived and walked and breathed, everything that she did was community. And we're going to continue that work. So having said all that, here we go. We're going to watch a short video on cancer, and then we're going to watch a short video on childhood cancer specifically. So we'll watch 2 short videos here to get us going.
Cancer doesn't wait, neither should you. We know COVID-19 is on everyone's mind right now.
But that doesn't mean you should neglect your routine health care. It's important to take care of yourself by doing regular cancer screenings. Screening checks your body for cancer before you have symptoms.
Regular screening tests may find breast, cervical, and colon cancers early, when treatment is likely to work best.
Lung cancer screening is recommended for some people who are at high risk.
Talk with your doctor now about when and how often you should be screened before you develop symptoms.
If you're having symptoms, take action now and call a doctor.
Finding cancer early improves your chances of living longer.
Make sure to ask your doctor about the steps they're taking to keep you safe during visits.
Remember, cancer doesn't wait.
For more information, visit cdc.gov/cancer. This message is brought to you by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, American Cancer Society, and the National Comprehensive Cancer Network.
Can you remember what happened when you first went to hospital?
I had cancer?
And did you know what that word meant?
No. People come by me and then they look at my back of my head and then they ask what it is, so I tell them. And I say that when I was younger, I had a brain tumour in the back of my head.
You just don't expect to hear the words cancer when you're talking about your child.
That first 72 hours for us was really, really terrifying. You try to be strong for the family. At the end of the day, you know, you're only human after all.
When my hair started falling out, my dad was just devastated. I've never seen him cry before.
I didn't think I was strong until she was diagnosed. It took everything. I had to stop everything to be there for her.
Sometimes she would be upset, but I wouldn't really understand why. Seeing me like that, it broke her heart, so I was like, why am I here? I felt worried.
I think she does worry in the back of her mind about it, but even if it's just like it's just a tummy bug, she says, I need my hospital. The cancer's still in me, she'll say.
I remember saying to my dad, I don't think I can do this anymore. He's like, you know, man up and get up and do it, you've got to. And I think I knew at that point I needed some help.
There was a lot of support around her, and she wanted to be like every other child, and now she is.
You have basically got to put your trust in a very, very experienced team of looking after your child's life, and you think you're going to do that, and all of a sudden it's not. It's taken out of your hands and given to somebody else.
The drugs are horrible, they do horrible things to the kids, but to see what she's been through, I'll never ever take her for granted. Thank you to that doctor. If I ever see him again, I'll give him a big, big hug and say thank you.
Good afternoon and happy Friday, everyone. I am Dr. Tonya Roberson, the chair of the Far South Chicago Coalition's Health and Mental Wellness Committee and your host for our Friday Health Talk of the Week. The Far South Chicago Coalition is comprised of caring community leaders, business owners, and engaged residents just working together to make a change and to create a thriving community. With your help, the Far South Chicago Coalition has created 6 key focus areas that we have used to create the Far South Chicago Quality of Life Plan. And in the words of Reverend Dr. Yvonne Lee Wilson, we are one band, one sound, and we deserve the best. Welcome to our show today entitled Cancer Prevention for Children. Cancer prevention is an action taken to lower the risk of getting cancer, and this can include maintaining a healthy lifestyle, avoiding exposure to known cancer-causing substances, and even taking medicines or vaccines that can help prevent cancer from developing. As more is known about primary prevention and lifestyle changes that can reduce your risk for cancer, Most research indicates that starting at a young age is very important and an important factor in adopting lifetime habits. You may also be at greater risk for some cancers if you have a personal or family history of cancer or certain cancer diseases. So now I'll turn it back over to Mr. Ted Williams III, who will introduce our wonderful guest.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roberson, for that great introduction. And just as we talked about our tribute here, I did not know that our good friend, the Reverend Doctor, that was her phrase. I did not know
Yeah.
that.
Mhm.
Which how appropriate. I want us to continue as we do this work. I'm going to always remember that. You just informed me today that we are one band, one sound, and that
Yes.
is that's awesome, awesome thing. So thank you so much for all the work that you do,
Thank
and I am just excited to continue this critical work. One band, right?
you. Yes.
Sometimes some of us may not be able to play at certain times for certain reasons, life and whatever. But that band sound, it keeps on going, and that's what we're
Exactly.
going to do. So, thank you
Yes.
very much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, we are here to really kind of just talk about this conversation, educate and inspire today. You guys may recognize our guest. He was here with us before, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce him again so that you all are familiar with who he is and the work that he does. And I'm just very, very excited to talk about this topic with him. Michael Harries, Dr. Michael Harries, is a pediatric resident. He grew up in Minnesota, then went to Washington University in St. Louis before moving to Chicago. He has been in Chicago ever since, working first as a high school teacher before attending medical school. And now he's completing his residency at the University of Chicago. His passion lies in working for the elimination of inequities in our K through 12 education system and providing access to pediatric healthcare. Dr. Harris, thank you again for being here. And I am just once again excited to talk to you about this topic. So why don't we just kind of start at the beginning? What, before we get into cancer specifically for children, can you give us an understanding of cancer? What is it? How does it appear? What does it do?
Yeah, most definitely. Before we get into that, I just want to say thank you again for having me. Like you mentioned, Ted, I was here a couple of weeks ago and thoroughly enjoyed that experience and just love the work that you guys are doing here. And so I just am honored to be here. So thank you.
And I was saying before the show, he's by himself today. Normally we have a few other folks and some scheduling issues. So he's kind of gone solo, like, when Beyonce went solo and Michael Jackson went solo. And that's when they really became really big. So Dr. Harries, I'm sure, is going to just blow this up today and do a phenomenal job. And so we'll probably just bring him back by himself going forward.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Now you've set an expectation that I don't know if I can fulfill. But I just am so grateful for the work that you guys all do and beyond honored to be a part of it. So thank you for that. To jump into your question, it's a great one of what is cancer, right? We hear about it all the time, both in terms of, the hardcore, unfortunate conversations sometimes at the doctor, but also in the media all the time. And we can be left wondering, like, what is it exactly, right? Because we know it can affect all parts of the body, and is one cancer the same as another? And to break it down, what cancer is basically the simple version is it's a disease where the cells in our body are multiplying too quickly. And so what ends up happening is, whether that's in the brain or in the blood or on the skin, is all of a sudden the regulators within the cellular process that say, hey, this cell is healthy or not, they get out of whack. And instead of doing what they're supposed to do, the cells just continue to replicate and replicate and replicate. And as you can imagine, when something just keeps growing when it's not supposed to, that can cause a lot of problems. And so in some regards, that's why you will see, for example, a big mass, in some skin cancers that is there. It's just those cells that are growing and growing. Or in the case of blood cancer, which is the most common type of cancer in children, those cells actually continue to grow in the blood, which inherently can cause problems as well, as you can imagine, if the blood is getting clogged up and those cells get to other parts of the body. And so at its foundation, that's what cancer is. And like I said, it can happen in different parts of the body. So bone cancer are the bone cells specifically replicating too quickly and without a process to stop them. Blood cancer would be the blood cells that are doing that. Skin cancer would be the skin cells. They're all kind of the same mechanism, but they do act a little bit differently depending on which part of the body they're in.
And so what, children and adults, what can we do to prevent cancer, before we dig into, once again, this question in children? What are some of the things that you recommend for preventing cancer?
Yeah, it's a great question. The difficulty with that question is it's very specific to the types of cancer, because unfortunately there are some cancers that we can't do much to prevent, and they might be genetic in nature, for example, where just the genetics that someone was born with kind of predetermine them that cancer is more likely to happen, or is probably going to be there. Versus there's other cancers that are very, very much tied to our behaviors or to the actions that we take every day. And so, holistically, a healthier lifestyle is going to lead to less cancer, right? And so when I say that, that's very broad, but the things that we think about, for example, smoking is a big one, right? We've known for a long time that increased rates of smoking are going to lead to increased rates of lung cancer. And what's happening in that situation is those chemicals in the smoke and from the cigarettes or the tobacco, they get into the lungs and they actually mess with those cellular processes that I talked about. And so therefore they kind of invoke that cancer or start that cancer when it wouldn't have otherwise wanted to be started. And as you get more of that in there, the chances of that happening are higher. And so, that's one example. The other one that we think a lot about is sunscreen, because skin cancer can come from increased radiation from the sun. And so, when we keep having direct sunlight on our skin, that similarly can mess with those cellular processes, which then can cause them to grow unhindered. And so those are some examples. Another one that we do think about with kids is actually a vaccine. The human papillomavirus vaccine, or the HPV vaccine for kids, can prevent cervical cancer. And so we know that cancer is specifically caused by a virus. And so if we can prevent that virus from happening, then we can prevent that cancer. And so in general, the way I like to think about it is doing the things that you hear all the time, right? Exercise, healthy diet, not smoking, putting on your sunscreen, those types of things, all in there at the end of the day can help prevent cancer.
Thank you so much. I'll just go ahead and say this real quickly. So I broadcast from my basement office here, and I have a puppy, and that puppy likes to come into my office and hang out with me. So literally, as you're talking, the puppy's on the door to the office going like this, like, let me in, let me in, let me in. And then I'm ignoring her, which is fine. Then she starts whining like, let me in. So I'm still ignoring her. We're doing this broadcast.
He wants to talk about cancer too, Ted. That's why. Yeah.
Right. The puppy pushed the door open and makes her way in. So I guess she's excited about this topic as well.
Yeah, that's great.
Anyway, so I want to talk about what kinds of cancer are most common in children, specifically.
Yeah, so so cancer in children is cancer anytime is always incredibly sad, right? We don't like to hear it. And obviously with children in some regards, it's as a pediatrician, I like to think it's more sad. And that's, not a distinction that we like to make in general. But the cancers that are most common, so the number one cancer in children is actually leukemia, which is a cancer of the blood. And so this is where, as I kind of mentioned prior, some of those blood cells will become, unregulated, and they will replicate in ways that they're not supposed to. And that can cause a lot of problems inherently, right? Because the blood goes everywhere in our body. And so those cancer cells can go everywhere in our body, which means they're actively spreading. And they can actually cause the blood vessels to clog up, to cause bleeding, to cause a whole bunch of issues. And so leukemias are actually the number one type of cancer in children. Followed by leukemia is then actually brain and spinal tumor cancers. And so brain tumors are, I don't want to say they're common in children, but within cancer, they're one of the more common childhood cancers as well. Together, the blood cancers as well as brain and spinal tumors, they actually are over half of childhood cancers. And so then the rest is a bunch of other things that are much more smaller. But between those two groups, they take up the majority of childhood cancers.
Thank you for sharing that. You made this comment that you said that, man, it's more sad in children, right? And cancer is bad all the way around. But there is a particular pain that I think when you're looking at a child, when you're looking at someone who has the world in front of them, and that they didn't, they didn't ask for this, they didn't do anything, they weren't smoking, they weren't doing all these things, they just were being kids. When I was in college, so I went to college in New Jersey, and I was involved in a college ministry out there, and one of the students there, we were probably 19 at the time, and we went she was getting treatment for cancer that she had. Actually, I think she was at the last stages of it. And so she invited me to hang out with her. We caught a train into Manhattan, and we went to Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And she took me to the children's cancer ward. And when I tell you, Dr. Harries, it was one of the most significant events of my life. My entire perspective on the world changed that day. When I walked through that cancer ward and I saw these children who, to our point, had never asked for this. And I remember thinking, I had a real spiritual kind of transformation from that experience, in the sense that I remember thinking about all the stuff that I concerned myself with as a 19-year-old man in college, and how I looked and what my car looked like and all these various narcissistic things. And I saw these kids with cancer, and it just was devastating, and yet it was life-giving. She overcame it. And, obviously, there is still hope even in the midst of all of this. And so why don't you tell me a little about that? Like, in terms of people overcoming particularly childhood cancer, is it harder for kids? Is it the same level? Kind of, how does that look in terms of winning that battle, if you will?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you so much for sharing that story. I'll just quickly name that I feel that same thing every day that when I'm working with our children with cancer too, is the way that they put a perspective on life that I think we all could benefit from, to be frank. Obviously, we don't wish that to be the reason, but I think there's a lot to be learned there of what is important, right? And seeing their attitudes as well as their parents' attitudes. And so I agree with you fully, and thank you for sharing that, because I think it's so important to name. And there is a lot of hope. And I think that's the other thing that it's easy to think about cancer and immediately think, to think death, but that's not always the case. And fortunately, one of the reasons why I love working with kids too is they're really resilient. They're incredibly resilient people. I would argue even more so than we as adults. And so, and I mean that both in terms of their attitude, but also their bodies. I mean, because they're growing and they have a lot going on. There's a piece of childhood cancer that is different than adult cancer for that reason. And so, one of the things that is very exciting is that we get to see a lot of children beat cancer, every year. And, it's one of the most exciting things in the hospital is when one of our children who has finished their cancer treatment actually goes out of the hospital, and everyone lines up and, rings bells and does all these things. And it's just super, super cool. And so we get to see that often. And that's on that front. I think the thing that I'll name is fortunately the treatment for cancer, and especially childhood cancer, continues to improve, especially when it comes to leukemias, like I mentioned, as that being the number one, the most common childhood cancer. That's where a lot of the work is being done. And we have a lot of children that are cured from that every year. Obviously not every one of them, but a lot of them, and catching it early and getting them on that treatment is important. And similarly with that second group of brain and spinal tumors as well, we have a great surgical teams, and if we can catch that and get that removed, that we often will see amazing outcomes as well. And so I wish it could be 100% of children. It's not, but at the same time, with every child, there's hope. And some children that means totally eliminating the cancer for good, and some that means getting them and adding 10 years onto their life so they can live into their teens, right? I think that's the other piece here, is recognizing that every additional day, hour, minute we can have with these children is worth the hope, and we need to keep fighting for that.
Yeah, thank you. That's very well said, and I appreciate that perspective and the hope that you bring to this conversation as well. So obviously, your work as a pediatrician is bigger than cancer, right? You deal with all kinds of issues, and I want to expand the conversation a little bit to ask you the question, what are some of the other health issues that children are facing? And then how do those relate to this question of cancer? Are you seeing cancer more in children that are obese? Or are you seeing cancer more in, that sort of thing? And so I wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. I unfortunately don't have, hardcore data to cite here. One of the things that I will say though is when it comes to general childhood health, the things that we are seeing is the obesity is a big one. And while obesity itself, or just children who are overweight, doesn't in and of itself lead to cancer, at least that we're aware of, it does lead to other health problems that can in turn potentially lead to cancer or as an adult or just other difficulties. And so when we think about quote unquote preventing cancer in children, a lot of the times what we're thinking about is not actually preventing childhood cancer, but more of how do we ensure our children are developing the healthy attitudes, staying away from things like smoking, for example, that would cause health problems later in life. And so that's the piece here that we often think about. I do in my clinic is less of preventing something from happening in a year to that child and more of how can we set them up to develop healthy life habits now to prevent those things down the road. The one specific area though that I will name is that HPV vaccine. I know there's been a lot of public advertisements about that, but that is the one cancer that we can stop via a vaccine, because we know that cancer is spread by the virus. And so giving that vaccine can actually prevent cancer. And we've seen that. And so that's one thing that we can do with children to prevent at least one type of cancer.
Fantastic. So, okay. So we're going to move into it's like I'm doing this like a little game show thing here.
Oh, let's do it.
Dr. Roberson gave me a bunch of cancer myths.
Okay.
And so I'm just going to throw them at you and you're going to just debunk them. Okay. It's like a baseball.
All right.
Okay. So let me bring Dr. Roberson in the room for this part, because this is going to be a little fun, okay. Hey, Dr. Roberson. Okay. All right. So Dr. Roberson, she is the health guru here and kind of is the comes up with all these wonderful ideas. And so I just wanted to, Dr. Roberson, before I go on this, I won't leave you in here because she's always in and out. She's so busy and doing stuff. So I'm just going to ask you, you don't have to stay here for this, but I'm going to ask you to tell me why this is important to you that we deal with this myth issue. You say you hear myths and things like that. And so can you just kind of set this up before I throw these myths at him? I would appreciate it.
Yes. Like you mentioned, I do a lot of work in the community. So I'm hearing from the ground up level from community members that are very interested in whether these facts or myths are true or not. So one main one I can start,
yes,
and
please.
actually all of them are kind of like myths, but then
you can do them all, by the way, if you want. I just sit back and let's go for it.
Yeah. The first one that I hear a lot, if a community member or patient, if they have the choice of having surgery while they're a cancer patient, that they're afraid to have the surgery because they say that when they're cut and the cancer is exposed to air, that causes the cancer to spread.
Yep. So that's not true. And the reason being is the way that cancer operates. And so, like I said before, it's actually those internal mechanisms of the cells that air doesn't affect them. There's other things that can affect them, like I said, such as smoke or radiation, but air in of itself isn't going to affect them, and it doesn't cause that cancer to spread.
Okay.
All right, Dr. Rhodes, let's go. Let's throw another one. Come on.
Hit me with some more.
Okay. Let me pull them up.
All right, I'll give you the next one. Here we go.
Okay, you'll start. Okay, thank you.
Myth number 2, sir. Cancer is a man-made modern disease.
It definitely is not a man-made modern disease in the sense that we didn't make it. Like I said, but so going back to again where it comes from, it's within our bodies, it's our own cells that decide that they're going to do something different. Now, I will say there's things that we do that, like I said, smoking is the best and easiest example where we create or do these things that can cause some of that to happen, but we didn't make cancer, right? Like those just affect the cells in the ways that they're not supposed to. And so it's not a disease that we made that we can go give to people at all. It's all within our own body, which is why some people will get it and some people won't while doing the same things because it's their body, their cells that are reacting to these things. We just know that some of these behaviors affect more people than not.
That's a great point. It's interesting because, you guys are, in sort of, she's in public health and you're in medicine, and I teach politics. And I read a lot about, government policy and what, what is happening. And I just read recently, there's this book that I read recently called Countdown. And it talks about, this doctor writes this book about how there are probably over 250 chemicals that are in household items in the United States that are banned in, say, Europe and other places like that. And so the argument in the book is that these things are causing, us to be more exposed to cancer, and cancer rates are higher today than they were, 50 years ago. And it's because of these kinds of chemicals that we are being exposed to. And, and it talked about even the impact of chemicals on testosterone levels and estrogen levels and things like that. And so I hate to deviate, but just for a second, because you mentioned something that made me think about that. And actually, either one of you really could answer this question around this for public health or specifically the medicine side. To follow up on that question, I'm assuming that is true, that even though cancer is not man-made, there are things that are happening in our world today that make it more likely that people will get exposed to cancer or have access or get cancer.
Dr. Roberson, do you want to go or do you want me to answer?
Well, I would just like to include the fact about now it's no longer your genome code that determines your health status. Is also your zip code. So the piece that your environment and where people are living, like the big study that they had to show that a white man in Evanston will live like about 10 years longer than a black man in Inglewood. So things like that, I think, definitely contribute to your increasing your risk for cancer.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more, Dr. Roberson and Ted. Yeah, that is true. Like you said, it's not man-made. We're not handing it out to people, but there are a lot of environmental factors, some that we know and some that we don't know, perhaps that will come out, in 10, 15, 20, 50 years that said, oh my gosh, look at that causing cancer. And like Dr. Roberson said, the sad reality too is that a lot of these, not all of them, but a lot of them are dependent on the environment around us and are put in places or unhealthy items are put in places where they affect, specifically poor people or people who are minorities. And that's not right? That's not fair. It's not how it should be, but it is real. And I think that's a piece that we as physicians, as well as the community, need to keep fighting against, because that shouldn't be something that falls along those types of lines, right? Like we should, as all human beings, have the same protection from these items, these chemicals that do have the potential to mess with our bodies and cause cancer.
Yeah. Health, as Dr. Rose and I were just talking about, it's a justice issue. Dr. King talked about, of all the injustices, healthcare injustice was the worst, right? And so these are not sort of minor issues. This is very important for us to wrestle with these questions of access to healthcare and exposure to, toxins in your environment and things like that. I've done some work over in Elk Hill Gardens, and I know they've had a big lawsuit in previous years about exposure to chemicals that were very harmful. So these are extremely important questions to consider. So,
and the thing that I'll just add on too is it's not, oftentimes we think about it as in the past, right? Like, oh, that was already there. That was put there in the past, or officials will use that as like, well, let's think forward, but it's still happening today, right? Like, and I think that's the piece that we need to keep recognizing, is that this is a fight that needs to be keep being fought. And I think about that scrap metal plant that's, thinking about moving to the south side, right? Like this is it's still very, very active, and that's not okay. It's not right. And, we have a duty to keep fighting for that, for the future of ourselves as well as our children.
Absolutely.
Right. And actually, People for Community Recovery is the environmental justice community-based organization that is housed in Argyle Garden. And it was originally spearheaded by Miss Hazel Johnson, and now her daughter, who was a strong community partner of the Far South Chicago Coalition, Miss Cheryl Johnson, she spearheads it now. And so you hear, and that's why we appreciate you so much for coming on, because it's a lack of education and health literacy in our communities. And that's how all these myths are coming up, the mistrust. And I feel like education gives you options, and it also helps you make informed decisions. So here's another one. We're doing a lot of work on the vaccination hesitancies in our community. And when we were trying to get community members to get vaccinated, one member said, I don't want to get vaccinated because they don't even have a cure for cancer. So how do they have a cure for COVID-19? What would you say to that community member?
Yeah, it's a great point. The hard part about cancer is we think, and maybe I should have brought this up right away at the start, right? We use it as one word to describe hundreds, if not millions, of different types of diseases, right? And so yes, at its core basis, it all comes back to cells over replicating too fast, and that's not good for the body. But but each cancer is different. Like I said, skin cancer is different than blood cancer, that's different than bone cancer. And so to have a cure for one doesn't mean that it'll cure the other, unfortunately, because it's all different and it's so dependent on everyone's individual body. So the first thing I would say is that's why we don't have a cure for cancer, unfortunately. And to be frank, while it's great to strive for that, and we should always strive for it, this idea that we're going to find a cure for cancer kind of it doesn't adequately talk about cancer in the way that it should, because it kind of makes it seem it doesn't really respect cancer in the fact that it's so different and difficult and individualized. And so that's what I would first say. And then regards to the vaccine, it's that it's very different, right? Like, we know what causes COVID. It's a virus. And so therefore we actually have one thing that we were able to target and create a vaccine that prevents it, versus cancer. Like I said, it's a whole bunch of things. And so we couldn't target one thing to make that cure.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Here's another myth. We've made no progress in fighting cancer.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have, that's a myth, because we've made a lot of progress, but we have a long way to go. Right. And so I think this is, I'm not surprised to hear that myth, because I think it's probably one of frustration, which is very justified, right? Of how come with all these medical advancements and all this money and all this technology and whatnot that we still have it. And the truth of it is we still have made a lot of progress, like we were talking about earlier, with the improvements in the number of children. Even as I talk to my superiors, they talk about all the time of how many more kids they're seeing survive leukemia than they did in the past, right? And so they can even speak in their own careers to seeing how, some of these children probably would have passed away earlier on, but now thanks to changes in treatment, they're not. But it's not where it needs to be. And there's some cancers that we've made more progress on than others. And I'll name it again, that unfortunately, some of those cancers fall along racial and economic lines again, too, where cancers that will affect white people sometimes will have more money than cancers that affect Black people. And that's not right either. And so the myth comes from a place of most likely frustration that I think is very valid, but we have been making progress, just not as much as we should or we would like to.
All right, Dr. Roberson, next myth.
I don't have them in front of me, but I have another question, and then we can go back to the myths.
I love it.
Dr. Harries, how early do you think that we should start education with children on prevention measures? Because a lot of young people, when they learn something and they believe in it, they just go really hard for it, and they really want to adapt to it. And that's my daughter actually used to work at the University of Chicago with me on the first diabetes project with Dr. Peak and Dr. Chin. And she said she didn't have a childhood because I had her at a community event every weekend. But she really learned from that. So she helped me with my idea for my dissertation, because she said, Mom, how do you think, because she saw so many people that weren't even really old, like 40 or 50 years old, really suffering from from diabetes. So she said, Mom, how do you think African Americans would be with their health at 40 and 50 years old if they knew at my age what to do? And at that time, she was attending Clark Atlanta University, which is a HBCU. So my dissertation was actually on assessing the health behaviors, perceptions, and knowledge of African American college students at a HBCU. So even at that age, it was a lot that they didn't know, but they were really hungry for and thirsty for the knowledge to learn, learn what to do for prevention measures.
So first thing, did you share half of your PhD with your daughter, I hope? Did you?
Yeah.
That's
You
awesome.
know,
That
I
was a
was
good
gonna ask the
idea.
same question now, you know?
That's
Yeah.
so cool. I love that you guys worked on that together too. And
Yes. Yeah.
the answer is, I believe that it's never too early.
Mhm.
Because like you said, I don't, there's two reasons why I believe it's never too early. Number one is what you said, is that kids love knowledge and they're going to soak
Right.
it up. And the sooner that we teach it to them, the more that they have at their hands to make their own decisions, which I think is really important. And we want those decisions to be educated ones, right? We
Right.
want to give
Mhm.
them those tools. And I think that's the most important piece that we can. And the second reason is because I think they deserve it, right? I think that sure, we want to make sure that we raise our children correctly, but from what I've seen too, is the more that we trust our children with knowledge, the better that they're going to, like I said, go to use it. And it's actually when
Right.
we keep stuff away that we run into more problems than treating them, like the little adults sometimes that they are. And I think that they can be active community members to help us move these things along, right? And so I think that's super, super important as well. And I think it's a great astute point that the earlier the better. The one thing that I will just add is we want to make sure that it's all thought about and talked about in a beneficial way for the children,
Yes.
right? Like we don't want to ever put guilt on them that they need to do something, or that even when we talk about weight or these other pieces, because that can be difficult for the students or the children. And so we always want to think about it as, how can this be uplifting and positive?
Positive. Okay.
Yep. Great
All right. Thank
question.
you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're gonna wind down here in just a few minutes, but so let's see. Okay, here's one that I thought was interesting that Dr. Roberson gave me. So acidic diets cause cancer. That's interesting. I know there's been a lot of conversation about diet around
Yeah.
this question.
So the hard part about diet is it's not as easy as like one thing or another. And so, even that myth is, I can't say 100% no, because I don't know how much acid, acidic diet the person is referencing, and so there's no question that if you're going to drink a lot of, let's say, very acidic drinks, that can cause some type of potentially cause some damage to your throat, your esophagus, and who knows if that's going to then mess with the cells. But it's one of those things that my answer is, everything comes back to moderation, right? Like same thing with weight and other pieces. If you're only going to do one thing and you're going to do too much of it, it's probably going to cause you a problem of some sort, whether that's hopefully not cancer, unlikely to be cancer, but not 100% that it's not cancer, versus thinking about, wow, I'm, doing too much of that. It's not making me feel good. I should probably cut back. That's the piece when it comes to diet, is moderation, because I also don't ever believe that we need to cut out all of the fried food in our diet or all of this, because that's not right either, right? We should all have our French fries, our fried chicken, our ice cream, but we don't want to do that every day, and so that's the other piece.
Now, Dr. Harries, now you got to be careful saying that to our audience here, because they have been well trained. We've had people like, I'm thinking of Sadiq, Dr. Roberson.
Right.
And if Sadiq were on the show, he's our fitness guru that we have on every couple months. If he heard you tell these people they can eat ice cream and French fries, he's going to be very, very upset.
I said only rarely.
Right.
Rarely.
And
Okay.
variety and moderation.
Yes.
Yep,
Okay. All right.
So, I'm not trying to get in trouble now. So.
Okay. So cancer treatment kills more than it cures. This is one I actually have heard.
Cancer treatment kills more.
Yes, so like chemotherapy, and that's it kills more than it cures.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the chemotherapy process a little bit, and maybe maybe debunk that myth or
Yeah, no, it's a great one. So I mean, if it's a myth, if that were the case, we wouldn't do it, right? We wouldn't use chemotherapy if we knew that it was going to kill the patient more than help the patient. Now, the way that chemotherapy works, though, is it's not fun, because it does kill cells. And so it's designed, though, to kill those cells that are rapidly growing, that have gone off the tracks, that are not behaving like they're supposed to. And the chemotherapy, the way that there's a whole bunch of types, and so I won't go into the details, but generally, the way that they operate is to target those specific cells in different mechanisms. The hard part about that, though, is your body doesn't like that, because when those cells are being killed, even if they shouldn't be there, that body doesn't like that. It can cause inflammation, and sometimes healthy cells can be killed too, just as kind of a byproduct. And therefore it can cause a lot of discomfort. That's why when you see people in chemotherapy, they don't look good, is because it takes a lot of toll on the body. But again, we wouldn't do it if it killed more than it helped, because it has cured, I've seen many, many patients cured because of chemotherapy. And the truth of the matter is the patients that unfortunately do pass away who have had chemo, it's because of the cancer, that it wasn't able to, the chemotherapy wasn't able to work in the way that it needed. And the cancer usually most likely got past it, unfortunately.
Gotcha. Okay, so I don't know if we got any more myths, Dr. Roberson. We do have a comment in the.
Yeah, we have.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and read this. From a social emotional perspective, do you think schools should teach about some of the common cancers in their health curriculum to help them cope with parents that may have cancer, beat cancer, or passed away from cancer? What an interesting question. Thank you, Ms. White, for this wonderful question. What a great question.
Yeah, I've been pondering this one since I saw it come up. I really appreciate it, Ms. White. I will say this is a difficult one, and the reason is because I think it's very age dependent. Well, let me take a step back. I think what I would recommend is, I think it's always good, going back to kind of what we were talking about before with Dr. Roberson, that I think education and giving the children the chance to learn something is very helpful. And so I think it's more of, we just want to make sure it's presented in a way that is to everybody and doesn't ever seek to target or to educate because of some specific child, right? Like, we don't want to ever make a child feel like they're on the hot seat, or that they are needing to talk about something that maybe they're not ready to. However, if we approach it in the sense of trying to educate all children about these things in a way that is, again, for education's sake and not to draw attention to anything, I think it can be very beneficial, because again, it can do many things. One, it can help children support each other if that comes up. It can maybe help a child who's struggling that doesn't know. And it gives children more information about the world around them and maybe some behaviors that they can change so that they don't end up getting cancer themselves. And so I think from a social emotional learning perspective, there's a lot of potential benefit there. But again, I just want to make sure that we would do it in the right way, because I think with something like that, you just want to make sure that we always have our children's best interest at heart.
Fantastic. Okay, so I mean, I could talk forever on this question, but I'm going to kind of bring this to a close. But I did want to ask you a bit of a personal question.
Here we go.
Yes, this is like the round robin. So we get to the end of and now we just let our hair down, and now we just kind of nothing, just very simple. Why did you? I know we talked about this probably a little bit last time, but why particularly were you interested in pediatric care rather than some other form of medicine?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a personal one for me, for sure, in a good way. So, growing up, I was the oldest child. So I think that, other oldest children can probably relate, where you were, and I had younger siblings. So when I was, I think, 12, my mom had another child. So I raised my younger brother and sister. I remember changing their diapers when they wouldn't stop crying. And so I went through it the hard way, but also fell in love with it. So that was the first thing, is from an early age, I just started taking care of kids. And then my younger sister was actually diagnosed with diabetes herself. And so I saw what that was like for her, the challenge, as I'm sure a lot of the community members and probably people on this call can relate to, of how difficult that is. And especially when people don't have a choice, right? And whether we're talking about diabetes or cancer or these other pieces, it really broke my heart to see a child have something kind of taken away from them and in regards to their health, which affects everything. And so it was the combination of those things that really just kept me aligned, I think, on children specifically. And the way that I always like to think about it for myself is, one of the greatest, I think, beauties in this world is a child's innocence. And when you just see in their eyes that they're so excited about something, or they're so interested or something, and they're just fascinated by the world around them. And how can we keep that alive? Right? Because I think that's what we need more as adults, is that same interest and fascination with the world and people, and a desire to understand. And when that's taken away from children, it really breaks my heart. And so I think that's why I'm so interested in not only pediatrics from a medical perspective, but also education from a K through 12 education perspective, because I think a lot of the same things I just talked about from a healthcare perspective are alive in the education perspective too, of how can we keep that love of learning and that belief in every child's ability to learn and become whatever they want to as well. And so that's my personal story. And it's for that reason that I love working with youth. So.
Beautiful. Dr. Harries, thank you so much. Dr. Roberson, we got to, I'm speaking for her, I believe, on this. You're welcome back anytime. We enjoy having you. You stood the test of the myth busting. You did that well. You handled by yourself. This was an audition for you, and you passed with flying colors. So
you're too kind.
No, it was really good.
Sure. And quickly, just thank you guys for all the work that you do. Like I said at the start too, it's been an absolute honor to be here now twice. But I just, I'm a firm believer in this work, and I love the chance to connect with the community and give them the education that you're right that unfortunately a lot of us haven't had, and that's not fair, right? That's not on us, or it's not on them. It's on us as a healthcare profession, and so whatever we can do to help get that out, I'm happy to do it.
Cool. Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Roberson and let her close us out today. But once again, thank you all for watching, and please, every Friday we're here at 2:00. So get ready, prepare, get your popcorn together, sit back, relax, tell your family and friends, actually like and share the Far South Chicago Coalition's Facebook page, and join us in really this effort to educate and empower our communities. There's so much media out there now that does not necessarily do those things. And so I'm really happy to be a part of an effort to do that. And thank you to all the leadership of the Far South Chicago Coalition, particularly Dr. Roberson, and just this persistent commitment to share with people information that will save their lives. And we're grateful for you. So thank you guys.
Maya Robinson just mentioned too, this was great, very informative. And Dr. White said, thank you, Dr. Harries. Those were the last two.
And I apologize, Dr. White, if I did not give respect where respect is due. So Dr. White, thank you for your questions and your participation as well. All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, well, that concludes our Friday Health Talk of the week. And I'd like to thank Dr. Michael Harries, our wonderful University of Chicago's community champion, for a very informative conversation that is much needed to improve the health in our communities. We will definitely have to have him back. And listeners, remember, establishing health behaviors to prevent chronic diseases is easier and more effective during childhood and adolescence than trying to change unhealthy behaviors during adulthood. And as Mr. Ted Williams said, we want to hear from you. We want to invite all of our guests to contact the Far South Chicago Coalition. If you've been influenced by our show or have any comments, please call us, visit our Facebook page, like us, comment about this Facebook Live, and even request show topics that you would like to learn more about. The Health and Mental Wellness Committee of the Far South Chicago Coalition is spearheaded by our president, Dr. Joyce Chapman. This show was directed and the content was produced by myself, Dr. Tonya Roberson, and a job well done by our moderator, Mr. Ted Williams III. We look forward to seeing you all next Friday. Have a great week.